All right, in this demo, we are going to deploy an AWS storage gateway. You'll recall that the storage gateway is an on premises appliance, whether it's software or hardware based, that really serves as a local file system cache for a variety of different types of file offerings, whether it's a tape library, a shared folder, a disk volume, whatever the case is. But in the end, the storage is really being backed in Amazon S3. So we're going to go ahead and deploy a storage gateway appliance. Specifically, in our case, it's going to be an EC2 instance. Okay, so here in the console, I'm going to search for storage gateway, and I'm going to select that from the list, and I'm going to click Create Gateway. Now, under how it works, it gives me some generalized high-level steps. Create the gateway and activate it. That means connect your appliance, in our case an EC2 instance, to AWS so it has access to backend S3 storage. Then create your gateway configuration, and then start creating storage resources, such as shared folders or iSCSI block devices, that type of thing. So down below, what are we going to call this? We're going to call this East Storage Gateway 1. And I'm going to scroll down underneath it, and for the time zone, I'll choose Eastern Time, US and Canada. Now we've got our 4 gateway options: an Amazon S3 file gateway to allow access over the NFS protocol or SMB protocols from clients. So they think they're storing files locally, such as on a server, but really it's going into an S3 bucket in the background. Of course, it's got local caching on the on-premises network for quick access, or we could enable an Amazon FSx file gateway for file shares, which I'll be doing, or it could be a virtual tape library through the tape gateway, so iSCSI tape devices for backup purposes, or it could be the volume gateway, which really makes iSCSI block devices appear to be available to on-premises hosts. Of course, when those devices connect with an iSCSI initiator, it's as if a physical storage device was plugged in, and so they have more storage available. You'd have to initialize the disk, partition it, format it, do all that normal stuff. But here, I'll leave it on Amazon FSx File Gateway, and down below, we can have this run as a virtual machine on VMware ESXi on-premises or Microsoft Hyper-V, a Linux KVM virtual machine, Amazon EC2, which is going to be what we're going to do, or it could be a hardware appliance that gets shipped to our location. Regardless of the option, it's going to serve as a local file cache, and then, of course, you have to configure it accordingly. So it gives me the steps for setting up the gateway on Amazon EC2, and you want to make sure you launch the instance from this button here, because it'll automatically, when I click it, open up a new browser window, and it will automatically select the correct Amazon machine image or the AMI for the storage gateway. Back in the instructions, it says, well, you might want to consider making sure it's got a fair amount of horsepower by setting the instance type to M5X large, and then select your VPC and subnet where you want it deployed, and make sure it's got a public IP. Make sure inbound security rules allow not only the activation port of TCP port 80, but also TCP port 445. That will be familiar to technicians that have set up firewall rules to allow SMB file sharing traffic. And UDP ports 137 and 138 for NetBIOS, if that's being used, of course, and TCP 389 for LDAP access. It also says, besides the root volume, add at least a 150 gig additional disk volume, launch your instance, and then copy the public IPv4 address, which you'll need when you proceed through this wizard. Okay, let's go back to launching the instance. The AMI is already selected, so that's good. For the name of the instance, I'm going to call it East Storage Gateway 1, so it's easy to identify. Down below, the instance type's currently T1.micro. I'm going to type in M5, and let's choose M5X large. I'll select a key pair for authenticating to that VM. This is all normal EC2 instance stuff. Under Firewall Security Groups, it wants to create a security group. It's going to allow SSH traffic from anywhere. We also want to allow HTTP. We can add more rules afterwards. We're going to add a new volume here. Let's say we're going to add a 200 gig volume. And we just want to make sure up in the network section that for the subnet that it's going to auto-assign a public IP that is set to enabled. Okay, that's good. I just want one instance. I'm going to go down and click Launch Instance. And we'll just click the link to get to that filtered list of instances. There it is. It's running, but we want to make sure it's fully initialized, meaning it will have passed 2 of 2 of status check. So we'll just wait a moment here and bide our time, clicking refresh until it's ready. Okay, it's running and it's passed 2 of 2 status checks. I'll select the instance ID and copy the public IP because it told me to do that. And I will complete all the steps above while I've done that. So I'll acknowledge that I've done that and click Next. For the service endpoint, I'm going to leave it on publicly accessible. So my Storage Gateway EC2 instance will talk to AWS over the internet. I'll scroll down, and this is where I'm going to paste in the public IP address of my Storage Gateway instance. Then I'll click Next. Okay, so it was able to make a connection. So at this point, I'm going to click Next. And it says it successfully activated my storage gateway. Okay, we're on step 4 of configuring the gateway. So it knows about our 200 gig cache volume. So it's allocated to cache. That's good. It did that by itself. We've got some CloudWatch alarm settings. I'll leave that as the default. And I'm going to click Configure. Okay, so we now have our eStorage Gateway 1, which has a status of running. From here, we could select it, and I could choose Attach FSX File System. That's what we configured initially. Because notice, if I were to go back to my storage gateways and select something, let's say I were to say Create Tapes, it's going to say, well, you didn't create your gateway that way. So you'd have to create another gateway and configure that from the beginning. Remember, we selected FSX Gateway. So therefore, if I select my gateway and go to Attach FSX File System, choose the gateway from the list. So at this point, what I would be doing is specifying my Active Directory details. Normally, this would be a VM. Your storage gateway is a VM running on premises. You need to join it to your Active Directory domain. So you'd fill out these details and then basically connect it to an existing Windows file server in the domain that has shared folders, and those shared folders would be presented on your gateway. So if you needed to create other types of gateways, just go back to the Gateways view, choose Create Gateway, and of course, make the appropriate selection, such as for an S3 file gateway, and go through the appropriate steps, select the appliance, and configure accordingly.